Welcome to everybody. I'd like us to try an experiment. First, Greg, do you have that passage?
Do.
I didn't tell you to keep that passage on, did I?
I did just be saying.
But if your hands are free, if they're not, make your hands free for a moment. Take either finger if you want, forefinger, middle finger, and try to find your jugular vein. Or wherever your pulse may be perceived by those two fingers. And if you can't find your pulse, or just use your imagination. Who's found it? And Greg's, keep your fingers there. And Greg's going to read from the Quran.
Indeed, it is we who created humankind and fully know what their souls whisper to them. And we are closer to them than their jugular vein.
The we here is Allah. An image of divine closeness. Closer to humanity than our own jugular vein. Closer to each individual than their jugular vein. Take some deep breaths in and out. Feel that sensation in your nose, throat. Closer than our breathing. Closer than our jugular vein. Welcome to those who are joining us. Last week, we were pleased to have join us Doris Dornberger, current president of the York Center Community Board, and Joyce Castle, former president of the York Center Community Co-op Board. And my neighbor Doris and my new friend Joyce. Joyce lives in Oak Park now. And to make a tie to our faith, our spiritual journey, and the reason we're doing this series on the York Center Co-op. Whatever religion we might be a part of, and certainly Christianity, calls us not just to have a personal faith, but to have a corporate faith, to invest ourselves in the welfare of the world. And you can think of the world and your neighbor as far away, but what about your next door neighbor? What about the people that you live with all the time? Co-ops gave the opportunity for people to really walk the walk of faith, walk the talk of faith, and to really say, my neighbor, I want to live with my neighbor, not just to help my neighbor, but to enjoy my neighbor. I want to have my life intertwined with my neighbors in a way that in your typical American subdivision, suburban subdivision, we might know our neighbor, we might not know our neighbor, right? We might even have a close relationship with our neighbor, or we might not. So the co-op was a chance to really, to say, let's live together. Let's raise our kids together. And I have a snowblower. If you need a snowblower, come and borrow mine. And what are you doing Friday night? Let's have dinner. And really have that kind of intimate relationship with neighbor. I mean, that's how I perceive an advantage of the co-op. And having lived there after the co-op days, Vince and I have had some of those experiences. Is this not spirituality? Is this not religion? An expression of everyday faith. So I hope that's helpful if you're wondering, what does this have to do with our faith journey? And I also wanted to give Joyce and Doris a chance to make any opening comments before we see the last half of the film.
I guess from what we watched last week, and some of you weren't here, I think for me, the major highlight of that was that this group of Church of the Brethren and also socialists came together and they decided to challenge to have open communities for African Americans to live. And a group of them did go to the NAACP and worked with them to make sure that there were open communities. And we saw that in the film. It didn't come right away, but we were able to get it back that off of one just one, but at least it was one. And I remember I did a lot of the shenanigans to how we exchange property. At one point I was told that we were so glad they took this risk. It was just a family bank at that point because they never had anybody to foreclose and co-op. So there was that integrity. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Doris, do you have any beginning words for us today?
So I grew up on a farm and I was always interested in community. And I just kept hearing about the co-op, which I lived just like a half mile away. And my son kept playing with being in the co-op. Joyce's younger son. Oh, it was a really good place to be. And we had lots of struggles. We really cared about each other. And I think those two things were always and there was, again, it's not last week, there were things that happened to help people be together, and connectedness that was just so important.
Thanks, Doris. In the publicity for these couple of weeks, I mentioned that the co-op was planted at a time, that immediate post-war period in the United States, 1940s and 50s, when racial and religious bigotry was common. I mean, explicit bigotry in the form of racial covenants and so on. Consider, though, how religious bigotry was also present. What do you think I mean by religious bigotry in terms of housing and accommodations?
No Jews here.
No Jews here. So the co-op was a place where Jewish families could settle. And this wasn't just an issue of blacks and whites, it was also Asian Americans. We saw that in the film last week. Our neighbor Nancy could not buy in Congress Knolls, which is the neighborhood immediately south of ours. And so her family and other Japanese American families, were there as many as 5 Japanese American families in the co-op? More than that? Quite a number of Japanese American families found a neighborhood where they could live, where they were not welcome elsewhere. So,
the connection to that is the Church of the Brethren.
yeah,
Because in the internment camps, some of the COs worked. So they chose Chicago because they knew the Church of the Brethren was here in Chicago, and the co-op was part of that.
Yeah. So the Church of the Brethren is known as a peace church. And as a peace church, many Church of the Brethren members probably did not serve in the military during World War II. Am I correct?
Yeah.
And that they were official conscientious objectors, COs. So they also heard about the co-op.
I'm thinking that was part of how the co-op movement was happening during the war, because there were people like all of these conscientious objectors who could think about working together, and they weren't at the war.
So with that as prelude, the second half of our film today. Imagine that, sharing your life with people who share your values.
Yeah, well, people group, most of those people, 40, 50-year-olds have moved on. Their formation was in college, and Jones moved back. But our kids who went to the Church of the Brethren every Sunday did not know a Christmas Carol, but they knew all of Leia's comments. So, I mean,
There's at least 3 pictures in there, all the pictures of kids in a group, and when the reporter, I'm assuming that was off of the Hanukkah party.
They were transmitting their culture. Like, what happened to your children now in their lives?
well, our youngest son, David, his works on nonviolence. He was part of the Institute for Nonviolence, helped created in the west side of Chicago, in West Garfield Park. And now he likes to create things and so now he's with Peace Players, which is an international organization, and he's setting up the US branch where they use basketball as a means to get conflicting neighborhoods together. And it started in Northern Ireland troubles. It's in Israel, which I have seen Palestinian women and then Jewish popes. The men are playing basketball together and playing teams, so it's really worked well there. They're in South.
What about the other children?
The other children, our daughter is an infant development specialist and I at Rutherford Children's Hospital. And our oldest son does housing. Yeah, so
They're very involved.
yeah.
I do want to make sure we get a chance for Doris, Joyce, and Vince. Might like to share what it's like to live there and to have lived there. Questions from folks about?
How many people are living in the home?
Well, I count 75 homes when once in a while,
77.
something like that. There are 2 empty lots.
So they live in the community, we're not, well, I so call we're not the co-op, we're a very different organization. When we knew we could not be a co-op anymore, many of us got together and struggled with what we're going to be in this reference here. And we decided we wanted to be a legal corporation based on what had happened to us. And so we are not for profit. And according to the state, we are the York Center Community Group. And
Would you speak up a little?
we are the York Center Community Group, according to the state. And based on the categories that we can be, you're considered a social group at this point, but I'm hopeful that, we do also get concerned about zoning issues and things going on around this. But it doesn't have, well, we have a Facebook group where people will talk about concerns and social.
Yeah, Vince and I didn't live there when it was co-op, but we certainly enjoyed a lot of important connections with people through our activities. This summer, we had a very well-attended corn roast. How many people? 60 people. And we have our bonfire, which is a very big community tradition, coming up on October 28th. And it's a huge bonfire. And it's the fire is so hot that they cook breakfast on it the next morning. So fun things like that. And I understand that that's probably a kind of a shadow of what the co-op used to be. And yet it still strikes me, I don't know about Vince, as a very unique place to live, where you just are it's quite okay to knock on your neighbor's door and ask for something if you need something.
Are there any families with young children?
Oh, a lot of children of all ages, real young ones through high school, young adults, and dogs, and dogs, and dogs.
More dogs than children.
Any other questions, comments? Schools.
They're part of District 45 and they're part of the Gardner High School. So when our son went in the 80s, late 80s, when history classes were sent to him, when he would talk, you're part of your Senate co-op. So there was still that stigma for his perspective on history and from the community. So, did he feel free to speak up? Oh, yeah, he would feel free to speak up. I think the teachers were just acknowledging that they picked him out and knew where he lived without having gone through files to see where.
Is that negative in any way?
It wasn't to him. He was quite proud that he should be there. I mean, two of our kids used York Center co-op growing up in a college application.
But in the process, use that to actually take some negative.
No.
That was my name.
I mean, Peter didn't take it that way. He came home quite proud. That was the teachers were neutral to the thing about it. And they knew co-op kids through and as you saw here, you know, people were professors and at UIC downtown. They worked at the Field Museum. So there were very prominent people in the community. And they were their friends. My grandson, Henry, there was a fellow who studied dinosaurs. And so every time Henry was at our house, we would go see Dave Warback and they would discuss dinosaurs. So, I mean, that's the kind of resources these kids grew up with. And conversation. And they went out and played. I mean, from early morning to late afternoon, they were out collecting snakes, doing whatever. They also had a horrible war game that they played in 5 different yards. So when and we had acre lots, so this is a big expansive. And they had rules of what bush was mountain and stuff like that. But both of our boys are wonderful negotiators. And I give it credit for the play that they were doing with the community. Now, just one other story. Our neighbor Jody and our son David were probably 8, 9 years old, and they played basketball with a 21-year-old. And what they did was divide up teams. They would go to the school playground, and there was a basketball court there. And they would divide up whoever was coming that day, who would be on what team. Now, fortunately, David and Jody were some of the better players, so they quickly got picked. But it was that willingness to take that age range group and figure out how do we play basketball together, which is about how do we live together. And that, I mean, that was the atmosphere that our kids were fortunate to grow up.
But you know, that kind of attitude and joining of the children playing together is probably still there. Isn't it? I mean,
Again, I think it is different, and I think, you know, society has moved on. I am struck by how many of our children don't go to our public schools. And
Well, where do they go?
they go to private schools.
Oh, and what kind of private school?
They go to different private schools.
Avery Coonley, please.
Well, it is.
Some go to Timothy Christian.
Several, right, and the kids who go, right, and multiple go to Timothy Christian in one household that began because they needed a full day kindergarten. Community only, the district only offered a half day. And then once that started, that's where both of the kids have gone. They go to various schools, and I think that's more the trend of where it seems to be with people in schools, and we both have worked in public schools, and I still do at the moment, and so that concerns me because I think there's real value in the public school. Although, again, in this presentation and other conversations that I've had in gatherings with first generation, second generation co-opers, and they call themselves the first kids, they talk about how difficult it was. Ted and Leah Robinson's other daughter, Judith, is here, and their other daughter, Liz, talked about how they moved here just after Brown versus Board of Education passed, and how she assumed she wouldn't have been allowed in school, but they talked lots about the struggles that they had. And again, having worked in public schools in the 80s and 90s, I saw lots of discrimination against Black kids in schools. And my grandchildren went to these schools, and they seem just much more accepting of diversity. I think there's a lot of change. There's a lot of that change too. But I think a lot of kids are just more accepting and comfortable with other kids.
Peggy, I saw your hand.
I was wondering how many people live in the community today?
Again, there's 75 households. We have, and it is definitely never flow. There are now multiple rentals. And
So there's a lot of moving in and out.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and lots of, and a different kind of view of home ownership among some people. Now, people in their, a lot of single people in their 20s and 30s, have late 20s and 30s, have moved in, and they just seem to have a different view of home ownership. And we've got multiple households where, again, it's somebody bought and intending to rent to others to live there with them.
Let's see, Andrew, and then we'll be wrapping it up soon.
You can say we ceased to be co-ops at some point. But
We
I
were
know
dissolved
at least-
in the courts.
no, at least two co-ops in the Chicago area. There is one in the North Avenue, and those are like homes like what we saw. And there is a huge building behind, it's on Paris, 810 West Grace. And you don't have to own it, but then you can go to the cooperative. You put it pass it, you pass it down, and you know, you still part of what's.
Right. Know some in Hyde Park, I know of one that I considered for myself, that's on Pratt, real close to Rogers Park. I know there are a number of buildings in the city.
What was unique about York Center Community Co-op is it was individual homes. It was a subdivision co-op. And I think it's one of a very few that were ever attempted in the US. Is that fair?
There's one in Baltimore.
Yeah.
That was started at the same time. There's one outside.
Yeah, I mean, this is a rare experiment in community living. Yeah. Joyce, you were about to offer something else, perhaps. Oh, okay. Also, the physical feel of the neighborhood is, I describe it as semi-rural. People laugh, like how could that be in DuPage County? But it's surrounded by suburbia. But you enter our neighborhood and there's this feeling of seclusion, nature. The roads have no sidewalks. There are very few streetlights, even.
No, there are streetlights.
There are some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a one.
But it's just, it's like people who've never been there but lived there in that area their whole life kind of look around like, I can't believe this is here and I didn't even know it.
And this was designed by professors in Chicago for their families. That's is what they.
Yes, but some of the roads are the same as the ones in Riverside. They were designed by the
Oh,
same.
Riverside, Illinois.
Yeah.
Oh.
You keep it lost in Riverside, you keep it lost.
I got much more lost in Riverside on a routine basis.
Yeah. After
We're
we,
smaller.
after we bought our home in 2014, it was like, how do we get home? Like, where is this that we live? Connie, did I see your hand?
Are each of the lots is minimum size? Well, I think probably the smallest is just over that acre. And so it is from my family. And so we're always.
Well, and they expected to have gardens, and they expected to have a front garden. They wanted space, and I said last time, we couldn't have fences. And that was wonderful, but they used landscaping, and there was a plan for that. Again, these were educated people who put lots of thought into things, and were willing to work it through.
Well, I'll just, let's do those initial ones, but from rural areas.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, so that gave a critical flavor to it. So,
And the diversity of architecture is very interesting. There's a lot of mid-century modern homes. There's one I would call California style. You might know what that is. And some sort of suburban homes, and just sort of typical suburban homes, and some ranches. Just a great variety. Yeah.
The initial people built their own homes, and last week, you know, the first time for many of these people, I can't imagine reading a book, don't know, although my dad don't learn.
So if you're curious, I think Vince and I should have a house party and invite WCC over. Because I also know that we're that only a few very intrepid people are gonna drive an hour to get to DuPage County.
Was, G. Wareman took the traditional two-story house, and so we had half lots. So there was a workshop and a family room and bedroom. Then we came up to a family room. Then we came up to the living area, kitchen, dining room, living room, and then all of that is a 2.5 garage porch on top of the garage. So we had this wonderful screen porch.
Mhm. And
And
that's,
so instead of looking at the work we needed to do, and I know to look at the trees. That's right. It was just like,
and you could look down on our house.
not really. Like,
No?
Not when the trees.
Oh, okay. Because Joyce's house was right next to ours. I want to give a shout out to Tim Frakes. He's the filmmaker. And he did this out of the goodness of his heart. He didn't charge anybody anything. He didn't make any money. He put it on YouTube, no cost. He made 2 other films about sort of hidden histories in Lombard. You wouldn't think Lombard is that interesting, but he found 3 hidden histories and he made a film about each one. Many thanks to Joyce and to Doris for being with us.